Okay, welcome back to the Penn State Blitz here on Penn Live. It is Penn State-Pittsburgh week, the 100th meeting between the two storied programs, and we're all about Pitt and Penn State. We're going to look at the future of the series. We're also going to talk about some of the matchups that might decide Saturday's game. We're going to get into the recruiting impact of the Pitt-Penn State game, and as always, we're going to finish up with the Penn State Mailbag. Okay, Greg, Penn State Pitt, it's the 100th game. I know you're excited.
Yes.
It's going to be about 85 degrees. It's about 1,000 degrees today as we record this video. I just want to get kind of your thoughts on maybe the 100th meeting of Pitt and Penn State, the fact that it could be the last one for quite a while. So I guess a couple of questions. What do you see as the future of it? And do you think it should continue at some point down the road?
Yeah, I think you'll see it come back at some point in time. But, you've seen Penn State with Sandy Barber and James Franklin focus on having one Power 5 non-conference game and two Group of 5, or in the case of Idaho and FCS, which they could not really control them dropping the FCS. So at any rate, they're scheduled out with Power 5 schools through 2026. So I don't think you'll see this game come back until at least then. And I think the problem, Bob, is that Pittsburgh's going to want a home and home. I don't know if that benefits Penn State because mostly Penn State fans, obviously Pitt had its fan base at Heinz Field, but for the most part, that even Penn State backed crowds at Heinz Field. Yeah. So does it really benefit the Nittany Lions to go out there and play and give Pitt all that money that comes with the gate and everything else? I don't know. And I think that's why James Franklin mentioned the neutral site, because you can write into those contracts, Bob, that, the one team gets a certain percentage of this, one team gets a certain percentage of that, and you might be able to reflect Penn State getting more of the gate because they're going to bring more fans. So I think, one thing he made very clear, I think he said it twice, was that it has to make sense for Penn State, it has to make sense for Pitt, it has to make sense for both of us. That's really what it's going to come down to moving forward. Yeah, so we're talking about Penn State and Pittsburgh here on the Penn State Blitz. And just a reminder to everyone out there, you got to check out the Penn State Blitz podcast. Yes. Greg's got a special message for you about that. Like, rate, follow, subscribe on your favorite place to get podcasts, whether it's Apple, Stitcher, Google, wherever. It's available. Rate, follow, like, subscribe, do it all. Remember that we put the picks and predictions together with this podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, do you remember the URL, Bob? No chance. No chance. YouTube.com/all access. That's not right. PSU all access. We're going to all Penn State. That's what it is. YouTube.com/all
You set yourself
Penn State.
Up for a fall there.
I did. You can get the Blitz and the picks and prediction video there as well. So we put it everywhere that Penn State fans like to find their news. Okay. Getting back to the 100th meeting Sunday, Penn State's a heavy favorite, but I think another question that needs to be asked is, from a competitive standpoint, this game has not been that close since the first half of the first game in 2016. Penn State kind of owned the second half. They lost the game, but they came from way back and almost won it late. Yeah. And the last two games have been fairly one-sided. So, for the younger Penn State fans, is this a game, A, that they're excited about, and B, has Pitt done enough? And if they lose again Saturday, have they done enough to warrant consideration for a resumption of the series? I think it's not quite. Is it fair to say they're in line with Temple at this point? You'll play them once every 4 or 5 years, but you don't want to make them a consistent part of your schedule. Yep. The only thing Pitt does for your CFP resume, as well, assuming Penn State beats them, is you have the chance that Pat Narduzzi is going to pull a rabbit out of his hat and beat Clemson or beat another top 10 team on their schedule. Yeah. But other than that, the ACC is not respected nationally for the most part. It's seen as Clemson's train, and that's just about that. You look at what Pitt, you're right, in the last few years, they just haven't necessarily been at the top of the ACC. And obviously, they played in the championship game last year. I'm still not sure how that happened. But in terms of national respect, they haven't really earned a lot of that of late. So I don't I'm much more interested in Penn State playing Virginia Tech, which they're going to do in a couple years. The Auburn series is going to be fascinating, I think. Nevada, which maybe isn't the greatest team in the world, comes to Beaver Stadium next year. I'm interested in them branching out and trying to find some new blood to play, as opposed to what seems to be the same old story outside of 2016 with Pitt, where Penn State's just so far ahead of them from a recruiting and talent perspective. And the other thing, Bob, and you may disagree with this, but they're not going to, it's not like beating Pitt guarantees them or doesn't guarantee them guys from the Whippeal. They're going to get most of the guys out there anyway. And the ones that always want to go to Pitt and stay close to home, they're going to do that whether Penn State beats Pitt 51-6 or if Penn State loses, 52-46.
James Franklin took some flack a couple years ago when he said, in reality, we value every game the same on the schedule. This is just another game on the schedule. They're all important. That got blown out of proportion. But the way that Pittsburgh has played the last 2 years and the way this game kind of sets up, I think he's right. I mean,
it's like any other non-conference game.
Yeah, it was up to Pittsburgh to kind of show the world that this was going to be a good game and it was worthy of kind of continuing it. But it just hasn't been the case. They don't really play imaginative football. It's great that they beat Clemson in Miami, but they struggled against Virginia this season. They lost at home, and they beat Ohio 20-10. It's not really a sexy brand of football. Right. So you just have to wonder, it may be quite a while. I don't know about a neutral site game. I really don't.
The question is, define neutral site, because it's supposed to be between the two schools. But where are Pitt and Penn State going to play?
I mean, you would think it would be in Pennsylvania. Right. So if it's not in Pittsburgh and it's not in Central PA, it's got to be in Philadelphia.
Right. It would have to be Lincoln Financial Field, which just doesn't. I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense either. So we'll see. Obviously, I think there's a generation of Penn State fans that want to see this game continue. I think there's a younger generation or a different generation and some within the older generation that just don't care anymore. And it just doesn't have the firepower it once did.
Okay. Let's move along and get to some of the matchups that'll decide this game. Before we get to the matchups, who would have thought 6 months ago that the name John Petrishen would have an impact on this game? And we're not kidding about this. John Petrishen was a Penn State signee, a safety. I think Pittsburgh Central Catholic.
That's right.
I think is a defensive back. Injuries, I think, and opportunity never really kind of combined to compromise his Penn State career. Late in his career, he decided to transfer to Pitt, I think, this summer. So he's eligible, I believe, to play. He's not expected to play Saturday, according to Pat Narduzzi. But that doesn't mean that he didn't have an impact on this game.
Yeah, James Franklin went out of his way to make note of the fact that move made them have to change their defensive signals. One question I would have is, John Petrishen knows the ins and out of them, but doesn't Penn State put a lot of signals on tape already? They should probably be changing those frequently anyway. Now, of course, you have to drill down probably to the very base level in terms of what you alter, because he knows all the state secrets, right? I mean, he knows the fake signs, the real signs, the sign that says we're going to go on the second, all those things he knows. I mean, he was a guy who, while he didn't play a lot, he was a part of a lot of scout teams and special teams and had the opportunity to see what Penn State's first team offense did, but obviously knew what Penn State's first team defense did. So, that was a weird turn that I didn't see coming from the NCAA transfer portal, but it does make sense, and we'll see how Penn State reacts to it.
Is there some kind of psychology at work here with James Franklin announcing this and the fact that we changed our signals? Is there like a perception now that he's trying to create that, hey, Pitt's going to use every advantage he can get to try and stay with us? And what happens if they change the signals, Petrishen doesn't play, and then Penn State waxes them again? I just think it's not a great look for Pittsburgh, and I think Franklin knows that. And I think
doesn't hurt.
He went out of his way to bring this up just to kind of let everyone know that the Panthers might be a little bit desperate for an edge.
I could see that. I mean, it was unsolicited. I mean, it was during.
He does everything for a reason. He
does. James Franklin certainly does. Like we've talked about before, Bob. His message is always for somebody, and it's not always the media folks on the phone line or in the room. Yeah.
Okay. A couple of matchups to watch. What are you looking for? Maybe one or two things you're looking for, and I will respond in kind then later.
Yeah. So we're recording this middle of the week. Penn State had its conference calls with players Wednesday morning. Jahan Dotson was asked about dealing with depressed man that Pittsburgh likes to play. And he was pretty clear about the fact that this is going to be a challenge because it's the first time they've seen it this year. Bob, I know James Franklin mentioned it as a big factor. I know we talked about it earlier in the week, but the more I think about it, it's not only going to probably decide the game, but it's probably going to tell you a lot about what Penn State's receivers are capable of moving forward. Separation has not always been an easy thing for these receivers to figure out. During the James Franklin era, whether it was John Donovan, Joe Moorhead, or Ricky Ronnie, whether it was Josh Gaddis, David Corley, or now Jared Parker, guys making themselves get open has been a challenge at times. They're going to have to do that this weekend.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it's going to be in play on the outside, especially. I think Penn State would dare Pittsburgh to try and press KJ Hamler in the slot. Ohio State plays an aggressive kind of defense in the secondary. You saw what happened last year when he was healthy in that game, a 93-yard catch and run. He made a couple of big plays in last year's game, including it was a jet sweep he scored upon. He's also he's a guy that you have to account for in every phase. I think Penn State's going to get him involved in the slot, and I think that's a guy to watch. The other thing is I just don't know anymore as we continue to see Pat Fryermuth develop how you cover him, because he can run. Yeah. He's 6'6", 260. He can block. Who do you put on him? Do you put do you put a guy that can run with him? He's going to be too big for him. If you put a wide body on this guy, I don't think that's going to work either. I think he is by far the one piece on the board that is going to be the toughest for Pittsburgh to kind of account for. He didn't play in the opener very much because he took that shot. They didn't really need him. But when Penn State needed him against Buffalo, he was a dominant player. That catch and run TD on 4th and 2 was one of the huge plays in the game. I think he is definitely a guy to watch. To me, the only chance that Pittsburgh has, and they do have a chance, it's a slim one, is if Maurice French gets involved in this game. He is by far their most dangerous player. I mean, if he didn't go off last week against Ohio, I mean, Pittsburgh would have been life or death to beat them at home. He had about 140 yards and a long touchdown. So he's an impact player as a kick returner. He had 2 touchdowns last year, 91 and 99 yards.
I don't think he's going to get those chances this year.
He's their best receiver. Last year, Penn State took him out of the game. He maybe was not as prominent last year in the offense. 2 returns for 22 yards. Now they add Jordan Stout on a warm day, there's no return yards on record for opposing teams. No one has returned a kick yet against Penn State because of this guy. I think it's 21 touchbacks and 22 attempts. I mean, they match up so well with Pittsburgh in special teams because of Stout. And I think if Blake Gillikin is smart and either directional kicks or just kicks it high enough that he can't do anything, I mean, I think that's a big part of what the Panthers are going to need to rely on for an upset. I think Penn State matches up really well in this game. If French doesn't get going, I don't see how Pittsburgh, is going to be able to stay with Penn State.
I'm a little interested to see what Pitt tries to do in the running game. I think Penn State knows what Kenny Pickett is and how they can shut that down. But Bob, there were times when Buffalo's offensive line were driving Penn State's defensive line 3 and 4 yards downfield. We've said, now I know it's not Matt Canada anymore, but the shovel passes and the twist and turns at the line of scrimmage, and that's messed up a Penn State defense before. Now, granted, the last 3 years it hasn't been as bad as the first year, but I don't think this Pitt offense is that good, but I do think they have some tricks up their sleeve for this game. I'd be hard pressed to think Pat Narduzzi and Mark Whipple didn't spend some time this offseason looking up some creative things and ways to beat Penn State. So they're going to have to be better against the run, but I agree with you, and we'll talk about it later in picks and predictions. This one, Pitt has a chance, but it's certainly not a great one.
Yeah, they did run for 213 yards in the first half last year in the rain, but they only had a touchdown and a missed extra point to show for it. They squandered a lot of opportunities to turn the ball over. Once Penn State kind of found their way and made some adjustments, the second half was just ugly. I mean, there's a chance that could happen again. Pittsburgh's got it. Whatever happens, Pittsburgh better get off to a quick start. That's why they won the first game. In 2016, they got up big. They're not a team that's built to play from behind at all. You saw it the last 2 years. They've never been ahead in the last 2 games in the series. It's something to watch for the first quarter. They can't start slow. Another huge component, though, Greg, of this game involves recruiting. Pitt and Penn State a lot of times probably come after a lot of the same players. I don't think that Pitt's track record is very successful when they're going head to head with Penn State and James Franklin. James was asked about recruiting on Tuesday. He doesn't really think that maybe the outcome of these games really has a big impact on recruits, especially in the western part of the state or in Pennsylvania in general. Do you kind of see it that way as well?
Absolutely. We've talked about it before. One game does not make or break commitment for a school like Penn State or Ohio State or even Pittsburgh 9 times out of 10. If you lose to Pittsburgh, but you still win 11 games, kids are going to come play for you no matter where they live. If you beat Pittsburgh but lose to Ohio State and you still win them 10 or 11 games, you're going to get better recruits that want to come play for you, that can envision themselves being the missing piece to a national championship run potentially. So, no, the outcome of individual games does not generally change a kid's mind, but you have to win enough of those games to show what the future holds or can hold. So, to me, that's the bigger deal, is finding a way to not just win games like this that Penn State should win by 2 touchdowns, but also finding a way to win on the road against the Iowas and Michigan States and Ohio States of the world. Yeah,
and Pitt's going to start a couple guys in the secondary, DeMar Hamlin and Paris Ford. They're both safeties. Penn State was after both those guys. They went to Pitt. I think they were 4-star kids. As we talk right now, are Penn State and Pitt after any of the same kids, either to fill out this class or maybe in the future? In other words, is there a little bit of indecision by maybe some really good recruits, whether it comes to Pitt or Penn State?
Not really. There's a couple kids out in the Whippeal right now. Dayon Hayes comes to mind. He might be in the City League. I can't remember. But there's a couple kids out in the western part of the state. But for the most part, like you said a couple minutes ago, Bob, Penn State is fairly dominant when it comes to recruiting heads up against Pitt. So if it wants a kid out there, it's probably going to go get him. And again, if the kid always wanted to go to Pitt, always wanted to stay close to home, or always wanted to go West Virginia, be a little bit closer to home, whatever, Penn State's not going to change that kid's mind in most cases by beating Pitt. So it's a wash.
Okay. Well, we're about 3/4 of the way through this little part of the show. So let's get to it. Mailbag. Do you have anything you can possibly try and stump me with, or anything maybe you can surprise me with?
I don't know about stump or surprise, but let's start with this. If Penn State is going to cover the spread, it has to do fill in the blank. And if Penn State is going to win by less than a touchdown, what is Pitt going to do that keeps the game close?
Yeah, so I kind of hinted at I didn't hint at it. I said it earlier. It's Maurice French. If he doesn't have a big game, it's just not gonna. I mean, if Penn State contains him, I think it could get. As you've seen with this Penn State team, Greg, they can look a little against Buffalo. It can be like the first 30 minutes. It's like, what's going on here? We're down by 3. So they're maybe not that great yet. They haven't really established the running game. They probably are not had their 4-minute offense figured out. They got to get better on 3rd down. But what they can do in a 15-minute span with their athletes is be explosive. And if they go on a 3-touchdown run, which is possible, considering the speed they have on defense in the kicking game with the return guys, with those receivers, with Frymuth, with Clifford, who had a 50-yard run. If they can put together 2 or 3 possessions, they can literally just turn the game, and there's just no catching up. So that's, I think, one thing to watch for, and I don't know that Pittsburgh can do that other than French. As far as how Penn State can lose this game, another thing to watch for, I would say, is probably turnovers, and if they don't get better on 3rd down. Just like Buffalo did, Pitt wants to shorten this game. They want to keep the ball for 35 minutes. They tried to do that 2 years ago. The game was 33-14, but Penn State started fast, 14-0. But the second and third quarters, Pitt had the ball for 80% of the time. Barkley got loose on the passing game on that touchdown in the 3rd quarter, and that was kind of it. Pitt doesn't have any margin for error. That's the biggest thing I see when I look at this game. Penn State can overcome maybe a disappointing 30 minutes. Pittsburgh can't.
All right, here's one that could stump or surprise you. There's a lot of concern about traffic ahead of Saturday's Penn State Pitt game, the noon start, the new entry pattern, etc. So, if you were a Penn State fan coming to this game and you were looking for recommendations about maybe you're just giving up and the traffic's so bad you want to go to a bar to watch the game, somewhere between Harrisburg and State College, what are you recommending?
That's a pretty big gap right there.
All right, let's say if you're going...
You're the one who went to Penn State, first of all. So are you saying, don't you think the bars might be a little too crazy? for the
Well,
game.
it depends which way you're coming in, but a little stop in the Boomerangs, maybe not a bad idea.
All right, now tell everyone where Boomerangs is. Now, this involves a little nugget about the back way up to Penn State
That's
from
right.
Harrisburg, and we know Dave Jones is going to get really upset if he listens to this.
Yeah, he'll get over it.
Boomerangs is on 45.
Yes.
Right after, not long after you take a couple of roads, you make a left from 104 onto 45. That's only part of the secret of the back way. You're not on 45. I think it's west or north. Very long. And Boomerangs is a big bar that just emerges
out of nowhere,
like
on the
a
horizon.
giant water tank out of the desert.
Yeah.
It's always calling our names as we know we have a work day. We want to stop in so desperately just to see what all the fuss is about, because it's always packed.
It is always
Doesn't
packed.
really matter what time of day. That would probably be a spot. And hopefully somebody out there,
someone in the comment section will have to
either
let us
listening
know.
to this or watching this can tell us, give us like a little update about Boomerangs. Maybe we'll get Dustin Hawkinsmith out there
to rank it,
to rank the drinks and the concessions, much like he did at Beaver Stadium. But you tried to stump me, you really didn't. But you should be the guy that talks about the bars in State College, not me.
Yeah, well, if people can't get to State College, that'll be the problem.
Yeah,
so check the comment section. Maybe you'll get some tips from other Penn State fans. All right, last one before we get out of here, Bob. Remember that picks and predictions, if you're listening on the podcast, it's right after the break. If you're listening on the video, you can load that new one up, youtube.com/allpennstate.
That was good.
That was good. I nailed it that time. Rate and subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening. Last question. You look at this game from, what we've looked at 2 games so far. We're going to see a third non-conference game this weekend. What is the biggest concern for you about Penn State after the first 2 weeks? I think you go a number of ways here, whether it's the run defense, whether it's the inconsistency of the rushing attack, the third down. What's your biggest concern at this point?
I think the third downs are going to sort themselves out. They're a team, and Franklin talked about it, but they like to take shots on first and second down. When you take shots and you don't get them, you put yourself in third and long, and that they're really kind of working against themselves when they do that. But when it works, they're lethal on first down.
Yes.
So I think you have to live with maybe a little bit of a poor third down conversion rate if you're going to get more big plays on first and second down. That's number one. To me, it's really the running game. To me, I really think that Journey Brown right now looks to me like he's the best back. If you look at the stats, I think he's the most consistent runner right now. For whatever reason, Ricky Slade has not gotten going. I think he's averaging 2 yards or less per carry.
What is it? 11 carries and 3 fumbles?
It's it's whatever it is.
12 carries, 3
it's
fumbles.
Nothing to write home about, as they say. So I think you'll see them continue to look at all of these guys, but I think now that we're getting to the more media part of the schedule, the leash and all these guys is going to be a little bit shorter. And I think by midway through the second quarter, they're going to settle on the guy they think that's working the best. I also think the offensive line can play a little bit better. I think Rasheed Walker's still kind of figuring some things out. They went with Mike Miranda at right guard in week 2 after CJ started week 1. So I think the maybe the uncertainty there is really kind of hurt maybe the improvement of the offensive line. I still think, though, I wouldn't read a lot into the first 2 games. I think Buffalo was probably a little bit better than we realized, and that quarterback made some good throws. I think that's a team that's going to do some damage in the MAC with that offensive line. That quarterback looks like he's good. I think they're a team that's going to win a lot of games this year. So I think that Penn State, and we're still, they scored like 400 points in the first 2 games. It's really, really, I feel like we might be nitpicking a little bit.
Yep.
Now, if it's more of the same and it's 17-10, entering the fourth quarter against Pittsburgh, then I think the fan base probably has a right to be more than a little steamed.
All right. Picks and predictions after the break, or a new video at youtube.com/all Penn State. There you go.